The development of people doesn't occur in a vacuum. Hello.
Hello.
That's a fact. People live somewhere. People come from some history. People have cultures that are different. People have value systems, belief systems that are different. And I have said to you probably 10 or 12 times this week, I wasn't counting, I've said to you, what you believe will have consequences in your life. What you believe has got results in your life. And sometimes you don't even know what you believe until things go wrong. And then when you see how you behave when things go wrong, then you realize that, oh yes, I am a person who believes ABC. The development of people doesn't happen in a laboratory, in a vacuum. It happens in the real world. You know, the values that people have got, their attitudes, their culture. These people wrote this. The ethos of a people will determine whether its development is healthy or stunted or non-existent. Just look at that statement. It was written by Darrow Miller, who wrote a very good book called Discipling the Nations, published by YWAM. But look at that, the values, the attitudes, the culture, the ethos of a people will determine whether their development is healthy, or stunted, or non-existent. So we need to understand that when we're going to help people, when we're going to offer micro MBA, when we're going to just talk to people and try to help them with their business, that where they're coming from will have an effect on that. We do not see with our eyes. Do you remember that? We do not see with our eyes. We see with our brains. And there's a lot of stuff in there. There's a lot of history in there. There's a lot of garbage in there, and there's good stuff in there, and it's all been growing. We didn't know it was growing even, but it's been growing. Whatever we put in there has been growing. And so we see something with our eyes, or we hear something with our ears. We don't hear with these things. We hear with our brains. And when the signal that we've seen with our eyes or heard with our ears, when it gets to our brain, it's not a pure signal. It gets mixed up with everything that we believe, everything that's happened to us. It gets mixed up with our culture. It gets filtered through all the teaching we've had in whatever church we've been in. Oh, some churches teach funny things, hey? I really struggle with those churches, with many churches. I just try to stay away from it. I want to believe in God because I know He's real, and but I worry about these structures that people have built, where people become power hungry sometimes. There are three types of worldviews. There are three types of belief systems. And everybody in the world, listen to me, everybody in the whole world will fit into one of these three categories. Serious. If you think of it, there are some people who we would call animists. They are animistic. That's the technical word for it. What that means is they believe that the physical world that we can see is made alive, is animated by spirits or by gods, you know? And in some cases, they even believe that the physical world is just an illusion. We don't really exist. We're just some sort of dream in the mind of God. There was a man called Plato, who was a very, very intelligent man and a wonderful philosopher. We learned a lot from Plato. And he wrote about our life as if we are sitting at the entrance of a cave. and the sun is shining on our backs as we look into the cave, and we see the shadow. You know, like if the sun's shining over here, we see the shadow. And we have, the only thing we've ever seen is that shadow. So we believe that the shadow is the real thing. Whereas behind us, there's the sun, and there's the rest of the world. But our vision is limited by what we have looked at, by what we understand. These people who are animists live all over the world. There are different types of animism. If you live in the area of Tzaneen here in South Africa, and if it doesn't rain for a while and you're a farmer, you know what to do. You will take some fruit and vegetables and maybe even a lamb, and you will go and visit Muggeridge. Muggeridge is the rain queen. And she will offer these things to appease the gods, to appease the spirits, so that the rain will come. Animism. There are spirits behind the rains, you know? And if we just contact them and if we make them happy, they will make it rain. Now, I'm not in any way saying what's right or wrong. I'm not saying that. What I am saying is this is one kind of belief system. And this kind of belief system will have consequences in people's lives. People who are animistic tend to say, you know what? If God wanted me to be rich, I'd be rich. If God wanted me to have a motor car, I'd have a motor car. So I'm just going to wait here and I'm going to pray and I'm going to be around and then God will provide for me. Animism. That's not Christianity. That's not biblical. That's animism. The opposite of animism, exact opposite, is called secularism. Animists believe everything is spiritual. Everything is controlled by the spirits. Secularists believe that the world is physical and that the only thing that's real is what you can touch and taste and smell, you know, and feel. Let me just put that down. They say the world is physical, controlled by natural laws, time, and chance. And this author, his name is Douglas Fuchila, he said, the human species was not designed, it has no purpose, and it is the product of mechanical and biological evolution. That is called secularism. There's a particular form of secularism, which is called by another big word, existentialism. Existentialism. Existentialists believe, and they believe they're right, that there is no purpose to a person's life unless that person creates some purpose. So there was this man, this French existentialist, he's called the modern father of existentialism. His name was Jean-Paul Sartre, and he lived in Paris in the early part of the 20th century. And he taught his people that life has got no meaning unless you make it mean something. And he would use examples. Listen to this, what he said to his people. He said, if you're standing on the side of a highway and there's a little old lady, a gogo, who is trying to get across the road, if you help her to go across the road, you have given purpose to your life. You've given some meaning to your life. But he didn't stop talking then. This is what he said. He said, you know, equally, if you push her under the truck, then you've also given meaning to your life because you've changed the world in some place. Isn't that amazing? That's the logical consequence of being an existentialist, of believing. There's nothing right and there's nothing wrong. You must just do something in order to give your life meaning. He had a big following. He sold lots of books. People came to listen to him speaking. And then one day, he lost a lot of his followers. Because what was happening was that the Algerians up in North Africa, they were kicking the French out of Algeria. The French had colonized Algeria, and the Algerians were trying to get rid of them. Were trying to chase the French away. And the French started bombing the Algerian people. They sent airplanes over to drop bombs on these fighters who were trying to get rid of them. And Jean-Paul Sartre stood up one day in public and he said, the Algerian war is a dirty war. And his followers said, but you're a hypocrite. You've told us for years that there's nothing right and there's nothing wrong. So how can the Algerian war be a dirty war? And they said, no, no, you're not real. You're a hypocrite. We don't believe your philosophy. Secularism, existentialism, secularism. The natural consequence of being a true secularist is that you might think that the ultimate experience is to kill yourself, because you might find that there's some meaning after you die. The logical consequence of believing this. In fact, there's a professor in Switzerland, in Bern, called Karl Jaspers, who warns his students that there's no guarantee that suicide is the ultimate experience. Imagine a professor who has to warn his students before you start the lectures, please don't kill yourself because of what I'm teaching you. That's because it's the natural consequence of having a secularist worldview. So there's animism, there's secularism, and then there's a group of belief systems, not all the same, they don't all agree with each other, but it's called theism. Theism. People who are theists believe that there is a God, a real God, a God who existed, who created the world. What's happening there? This God is personal, and therefore the universe is ultimately personal. That's what a theist believes. And one of the consequences of being a theist is that you believe that people are created for a purpose and that people have significance. So there's only 3 types of belief systems. And everybody, you fit into one of those 3 blocks. Some people say, you know what, I'm a Christian. And then you listen to what they're saying, and they'll listen to how they talk, listen to how they behave, and you realize they're not Christian at all. They're actually animists. They're just sitting waiting for God to do something instead of being responsible for themselves. 3 worldviews. Is there anything that you don't understand there? Any questions you want to ask about what I've just said? Because this is important when you are going to do training. This means that your clients, all of them, will fit into one of those 3 boxes. And what you believe will have consequences in your life. You believe the first thing, there will be consequences. Can I move on? I see you writing there.
Yeah.
Everybody's got a story. Here's a true story. There's a Peace Corps nurse, that is a nurse who teaches other nurses in foreign countries. In Sierra Leone, she taught microbiology to a group of 10 local nurses, nursing students. All of them passed the exam, they passed the tests. But after the final exam, one student said this to her. He said, Miss, I know you taught us about polio. You know what polio is, hey?
No.
But you want to know, you really know how people get polio? He said, it's the witches. They are invisible. They fly around at night and they bite people's backs. That's how people get polio. See, their grandmothers had taught them the witches were real and that microorganisms, viruses, germs, were things that only white people believed in. Now, can you imagine a nursing sister who doesn't believe in the existence of germs and viruses? Why will she wear a mask during COVID? Why will she wash her hands before she examines a patient? If these things don't exist, if it's all just a white myth. Do you understand what I'm saying? What this nurse believes will have sometimes very bad consequences for her patients and for her life. There's a man called Malcolm Muggeridge. It doesn't matter about his name. It's a funny name. But he was a leading TV journalist. He worked for the British Broadcasting Corporation in the 1950s and 60s. And he was a third generation Marxist. Now that's important. That means he had a belief system that said that people are consumers of resources. That is at the heart of Marxism. People are consumers of resources. And he visited Mother Teresa in Calcutta. One night she was sitting up looking after a baby that had been left on the doorstep of the mission. And he asked her a question. He said, there are so many children out on the streets of Calcutta dying of starvation. What difference does it make if you save this one? And he says, he wrote a book about this later. He says that she just looked at him. She didn't even understand the question. So he tried again. Why try and save this one, you know? There's so many dying. What difference does one make? And she just looked at him. And he says, he wrote a book called Something Beautiful for God. Something Beautiful for God, about Mother Teresa and his visit. And he says that that night he was lying in his hotel room and he realized something. He had an insight, he had a revelation. And he said later this was the spiritual turning point of his life. He actually became a Christian later on in his life. He said that Mother Teresa saw those children in a totally different way than he did. Their belief systems were different, so they interpreted the plight of the children in different ways. He saw them as consumers of resources. She saw them as image bearers of God. Now, if you believe that God has created this person in front of you, if you believe that this person in front of you has got potential because they're made in the image of God, and if you just give them a chance, they can grow, you will teach them in a certain way. You will treat them with respect. You will go out of your way to try and find out how to provide the environment in which they can grow. If you believe that this person is just a drain on society, you won't bother. What you believe as a trainer, what you believe as a person, will have real consequences in your life. Here's a true story again. True. You know what happened in Japan at the end of the Second World War? There was a big bomb that was dropped on Hiroshima and then later on Nagasaki, another bomb, and hundreds of thousands of Japanese people were killed. Lots of them, all their belongings were destroyed, their houses were destroyed, and they were left penniless. And a group of these penniless Japanese people went to the Dominican Republic. That's on the island of Haiti. It's on the other side of the island from Haiti. 30 years later, after going with nothing, 30 years later, they owned all the luxurious houses on the hills, and the local population were still poor. The local population was poor when they arrived. 30 years later, they were still poor, but the Japanese people had become rich. And you know, people have asked questions about that. It's obvious you would ask questions. Why? What's the difference? Those Japanese people were not colonialists. They didn't go with guns and Bibles to preach to people or anything like that. They just went to live. They were looking for a place to survive. And they succeeded, but the local population stayed poor. Why? It was because of what they believed. The Japanese people have got a value, a social value called gambare. There's the word, gambare. It means try harder. Don't give up. Never give up. In fact, they say it is a shame on your family. It is a shame on your father if you give up. You must keep trying till you win. The local farmers were animists. Remember I told you what an animist was? If the gods want us to be happy, we'll be happy. If the gods want us to have crops, we'll have crops. And so they believed whatever will be, will be. And because they believed that lie, they stayed poor. Whereas these Japanese people became wealthy. This is true. I didn't make up the story. Sociologists have gone there to study this. And the only real difference between the two groups is what they believe. So when I say to you, what you believe will have real consequences in your life, it's worth checking up. Do you know what you believe? Do you really know what you believe? Maggie, are you asking something? No, okay, sorry, I thought you were talking to it, sorry. Ideas have got consequences. Proverbs 23 says, as a man thinks in his heart, so is he. You could say, as a woman thinks in her heart, so is she. What you think, what you believe will result in something on the outside.